has been an entire year since I started coloring, which it's been a wild year. Today I wanted to compare the Restly alcohol markers with the Ohuhu markers, aka kind of the more expensive brand versus a cheaper alternative, and determine which one is worth it for you. So if you're just getting into coloring and you're seeing videos all over your For You page, I guarantee you have seen people use Ohuhu markers. It's for good reason. They are good markers, but they are very expensive, and it's hard to say spend $100 on markers for a new hobby that you're not sure if you're going to stick with long term. Ohuhu markers are actually in competition with the Copic markers, which are even more expensive, but these are kind of the ones that everyone is using for coloring. The ones I got started with are the Restly markers, and this is what they look like. So some quick facts before we get into the full comparison. So right now on Amazon, Ohuhu markers are $99 for 120 markers, and Restly is $36 for 120 markers. I have seen this price fluctuate between like 25 and 36. I've also seen Ohuhu markers go down like $10 maybe. They do go on sale sometimes, but not often. So if you wanted to price it out per marker, you will spend 83 cents on Ohuhu markers and about 30 cents for Restly markers. So a big difference. What I want to determine today is that difference worth it? Is it that much better to make it worth the cost? And is it something you should start out with, or should you start with the Restlys? So that's what we're going to talk about today. Some more facts about the markers themselves. Ohuhu has a few variations in marker offerings. So I have the one that is brush tip on one side and broad on the other side. They have one that is brush tip and fine tip, as well as broad and fine tip. So they have 3 variations to the marker themselves, as well as they have a bunch of sets of markers. So I have the, I think, standard 120, but there's also like a pastel set, there's a skin tone set, there's all these other sets you can get. So you can get yourself over 300 markers if you really wanted to. And I have been considering getting more, but I've been trying to like pace myself and not jump on it right away. A lot more options and variations with the Ohuhu markers. The Restly markers, you have a standard set of either 40 or 120 markers. There's no variations like skin tone sets or anything else. The 120 markers is all they have. So I would like to see them make some more markers, and I would gladly buy them. One thing to know about alcohol markers is they will bleed through paper. I always put a piece of paper in between the pages I'm coloring, just, because I don't want to bleed through. Sometimes they will ghost onto the back. So this is what you call ghosting, when it's just on the back side, but it doesn't bleed onto your test sheet or anything like that. So you're always going to see something like this on your coloring pages if you're using alcohol markers. The coloring books from Can You Believe It and Elise Brienne are pretty thick, and they don't bleed too often. If you are very heavy-handed, or you're trying to blend, or you're just going over the same section over and over, you're increasing your chances of bleeding onto the next page. That's why I just always have a test sheet in between, because I'd rather just play it safe and not have to worry about the next page and ruining it with bleed through. If you're getting a coloring book that is Amazon KDP, I'd probably put 2 pieces of paper, like printer paper, in between, because this is very thick paper. This is not like, I don't want to be rude, but this is not high quality paper. It's not the end of the world. As long as you know what you're getting into, then just play it safe and have your test sheets in between. So obviously one of the most important things to know about these markers is, do they actually color good? Is the experience coloring with them enjoyable? And honestly, I'd say yes to both of them. They are different, and they definitely feel different. I'm gonna start with the Restly markers first. So these are, like I mentioned before, these are a great beginner alcohol marker set. They are easy to hold. They have a good amount of colors, and they're 120 pack. They're affordable. I feel like they are good to start with, because if you've never used alcohol markers, you don't really know how to use them and like how they work. So it's good to test out with something cheaper than jumping straight into the expensive kind. One thing to know about alcohol markers is they can smell bad. And for the most part, the Restly markers don't smell bad. There's like 1 or 2 in the whole 120 that do have a smell. But other than that, when I'm coloring, I don't really notice the smell. They do make more noise when you're coloring versus the Ohuhu. The Ohuhu are nearly silent. The Restlys make a noise. And I find that great for videos. Like, that sounds wonderful in videos. It doesn't bother me whatsoever, but I know there are some people out there who hate the sound of any brush markers making noise. So if that's you, these ones definitely do make noise, and maybe maybe that's enough of a reason not to get them. Now for the Ohuhu markers, they are a more smoother experience, I'd say. It's hard to like really fully describe. I'll show a comparison in a second here so you can maybe understand what I'm trying to say. Ohuhu markers are juicier, they are quieter, and they're just smoother. Like they glide smoother. Yeah, and I don't know if all markers are like this or if all markers are like this. I don't know what the norm is because I've only used these two types of alcohol markers. One more thing to know about the brush tip with the Ohuhu markers is they are a lot more flexible than the Restly markers, and you may like that or you may not. I actually did like the firmness of this brush tip because it kind of felt like, okay, I'm coloring with alcohol markers, but it kind of feels like a Crayola where it's going exactly where I want, whereas the Ohuhu is very flexible, and when you have brush tips that lend themselves to be more flexible, they're not always going to be exactly the same. So marker to marker, there are some differences, and that can mess me up. Like I will be coloring perfectly in the lines and then I will switch markers and start going all outside the lines because it's just completely different than what I had just been coloring with. So that's definitely kind of a con to me. It is kind of annoying, but it's not the end of the world. I can live with it. You know what I mean? Ohuhu markers do bleed more than the Restly markers, I have found. I think that's just because more ink is coming out. Like I said, they're more juicier. I think that's why they just bleed more. Sometimes they will also like bleed outwards in a design, and this totally depends on the paper itself. Depending on like how porous it is, they will spread out more. But because more ink's coming out with the Ohuhus, they actually blend out more. So you will be inside the line and then a minute later you'll look and it'll be all outside the line. One thing to know though, if you have the chisel broad tip, is those will bleed significantly more than the brush tips. If you start coloring with those, you're gonna bleed through and be like, holy crap, I did not know that was gonna happen. Yeah, so what I do is I just like to use the very tip right there to draw straight lines. I don't use this side for coloring ever. When I store my Restly markers, I store them with the brush tip down because I never use the chisel tip. Even if I'm coloring large sections, I found that it was a lot more streaky and more annoying to use the chisel tip than to just use the brush tip and color a lot. That's kind of a basic overview on the actual coloring with the markers. Okay, so I've got my cozy coloring book out, and this is one of the ones from Amazon, so this bleeds more than others. And I just want to show you coloring with the two markers. So I'm just going to start with the Ohuhu markers. And now for the Restly markers. Now you probably heard the difference, but I'm not sure if you could see the difference in the tip bending or not, so I'll try and do another close-up of that. You can see that these are starting to bleed a little bit, but that's just because of the paper. Both of them bled a little bit, but the rest they actually bled more. I'm actually shocked by that. Maybe I was going harder with that one. So let me see if you can see. See how that's like barely moving the tip? And this is all a fairly, regardless of the pressure, it's all fairly one even width. With the Ohuhu, see how much more of that is blending and how much more variation you can get depending on if you're lifting up or not. Hopefully that kind of explains what I was talking about with the flexibility of the tips. The colors in the standard 120 set are pretty similar. I actually just made this swatch sheet, so if you have the Restly markers and you need one, this is on my website now, but here are the colors in the standard 120 set. And then for Ohuhu, these are the colors that come in their 120 set. Each set has something I wish the other one had. So there are some yellows in here that I wish were over here. Like I use a lot of these ones often that they just don't really have. They have these colors and this color that I tend to draw from over here. It's hard looking at these and then remembering what color I wish I had in each one in the moment. I will say the difference between the neutrals though is Ohuhu has a lot in this set, which is fine. They have warm grays and cool grays, whereas Restly just has all of these, and I'd consider this one warm and maybe this one, and the rest are cool. You're getting a lot in your section that are neutrals, except for browns. That's the one thing that Ohuhu doesn't have a ton of. Like, the browns are just scattered through up here, but there's not a lot. There really isn't. So I guess that's one thing I'd say for sure Restly has a lot more of is the browns. I'm sure part of that is because Ohuhu has other sets and they have a whole skin tone neutral set that would have the tans and the browns. So I'm assuming that's why it's not in this standard set, because they want you to buy more. That is one huge difference. Other than that, it's like, it's little things. I'll be looking for a specific color and one will have it and one won't, and I don't know which ones those are at the top of my mind right now. Part of me wants to get more Ohuhu markers, but then part of me like, do I need them? I have these 2 sets. Like, I don't know that I need them. I think if Restly had more sets, that would be a game changer. So hopefully they're listening and they will work on that, because I think that could really help set them apart and move them up a peg. Between the two, which one actually lasts longer? I'm gonna tell you something. I found out the hard way that Restly markers kind of struggle sometimes to color in large sections. Up here, worked out fine. That red, juicy, was flowing, no issues. Down here though, if you saw my video, it's likely you didn't. I had to go through 3 different pinks. Don't know which side I started on, but I think I started over here. The first one I did, completely dried. Second one I did, I got to the bottom, it was dried. So I had to use this third one, which was not the exact color I wanted. I wanted it to be more like a peachy pink and not like pink. Kind of changed the vibes of everything, but I had to go with it. And it kind of struggled at the end. So when you're coloring this large of a section with Restly, they tend to struggle. Let me see if I can find one in this coloring book that Ohuhu did. Oh, like this. This was Ohuhu, and I didn't have any troubles coloring this entire section like I did with this mushroom. And this is actually smaller. So between the two, which one lasts longer just in terms of actual coloring? It's hands down Ohuhu. Now, long term, I have been using these for a year. I've been using these for, let's just say 3 months less than these. They both still have ink in them, but the Restlys are drying faster than they did when I first started, is what it feels like. I do have them stored like this so that all the ink is going down to the brush tip. And then the Ohuhus I have stored like this. But I do actually have one Ohuhu completely dried out now. Which one is it? It was like Y18 or R18. I think it's this one. Like, you can, I wonder if you can see that. See how it's like faded towards the top? I don't know if you can see that or not. I even flipped it around because with the Ohuhu markers, you can take this out and flip the brush around. Still doesn't want to work. That's a little frustrating that that one has already died, because it's not like I use it in every single coloring page. Overall, I would say that Ohuhu lasts longer than the Restly, and they do have a leg up there. A lot of people want to know, do these markers blend? And the answer is yes, they both blend. I just don't know how. I don't know how to make it work and make it work good consistently with all colors. Like, I just haven't figured it out. I know that the Ohuhu markers, like, oh, I have an example I can show. The Ohuhu markers take longer to dry. So if you're trying to do a shadow, you have to wait a lot longer to actually get the shadow to show up. This whole page was done with Restly. And right here, I did that shadow immediately. Immediately after coloring this, I did that, and it blended a little bit. I don't know if you can see it blended just a tad. Enough to not look super stark. But with Ohuhu, if you do that, you're gonna get something like this. So I did some shadowing underneath the leaves on the purple, and you can't even see it. That is because the light purple was not dried all the way. So when I put the next color purple on top of it, it just bled all the way out, and you can't even see that shadow. Same thing with the purse. I obviously did that a little bit too soon, and so those lines aren't as sharp as they could be. If that's the look you want to go for, then do it literally right after you color, because then they will blend out a lot. If you want a more obvious shadow, you have to wait for it to dry. I am not the best person to ask about blending. I haven't perfected it. I don't use it a ton. I know a little bit, I guess, but not a ton. Not enough to say one blends better than the others. Sorry about that. I'm not very good at blending. One thing I do want to bring up though is kind of a huge red flag for the Restlys. I'm gonna hand it off to them being just cheaper. They do yellow the pages, and unfortunately I did not know that when I first started coloring. I didn't even know that was something to look into or to be cautious of. And you can see that this page yellowed onto this page, first of all, but it also ghosted onto the back, and that ghost yellowed this page over here. And that happened for all of the ones I used for Restly. So what I started doing was I would tape a sheet of paper onto the back so that it wouldn't ruin the next page, but I didn't know that soon enough. So now I have a bunch of pages that just have yellow on them and not much I can do at that point. That was an unfortunate thing to learn. This happens with all of the Restly pages, no matter which coloring book I have, it's gonna do it to all of them. The Ohuhu markers do not do that, which I'm glad they don't because they're 3 times the price. So I would definitely hope that they weren't basically the same quality as the Restly. If you know that going into using the Restly that you're just gonna tape a piece of paper to the backside, is that really that big of a deal? Not really. Like, I've been doing it for some of my coloring books now and it is what it is, you know? So I'm fine with that. It's just definitely something to keep in mind. So now comes time to determine which one is better. I will be honest, I do think the Ohuhu markers overall are better. But my biggest issue with them is price, and how many colors there are makes you feel like you have to get them all. So I would recommend, if you're gonna do Ohuhu, just get the standard set, work with that, learn them, determine if you're gonna keep up with coloring enough to get more markers. I mean, I've been using this set for what, like 9-10 months, something like that. And I'm only now to the point where I'm like, maybe I should buy more. Overall, I truly think the difference is the price, and you're gonna get what you pay for with both of them. It comes down to what you can afford and what you think is worth it. Like, what cons are too big of a con where you have to upgrade to the Ohuhus and vice versa. You definitely can live with the faults of the Restly markers. They are not terrible markers. They are pretty dang good markers for the price of them. I am not upset anytime I have to use the markers. Oh, that is definitely one thing I will say. The bag that the Ohuhu markers came in just flung all around. If you open that up, they were just not standing up straight. The Restly markers, however, come in a little thing that have like plastic inserts at the bottom. See, it's like split down the middle because there's 2 plastic inserts. This is ideal for traveling. So anytime I go camping, anytime I go on any sort of trip that I know I want to be coloring at, I'm bringing the Restlys. I am not bringing the Ohuhus because, first of all, I work too hard to organize those and I don't want to I don't want to have to reorganize them all. And so the Restly markers are 100% better for traveling. And if that's something you know you want to do, I would definitely have these on hand for your travel markers. So overall, yeah, I think both options are great. It's going to come down to what you can afford and what you find worth it. Traveling, I forgot about that until just now. That is definitely a huge, huge bonus to the Restlys. The bag that the Ohuhu ones came in had no insert at the bottom. They just were like free ranging. And I'm like, oh my God, yeah, no. For as much money as they are, they should be able to just use the bag and keep things organized, but no. So I do fault them a little bit for that. I did not like that. So I'd love to know which one out of these 2 markers would you choose, and if you have experience with either one of them, do you prefer one over the other? I'd love to know your thoughts on that. If you have any questions about coloring or whatever, let me know. I have a video all about my favorite coloring books that I got last year. I'm sure I'll be making one at the end of this year with any new coloring books I buy, but the video I have up had over like what, 2, 4, 6, over 12 coloring books to look through. So if you're looking for some great coloring book options, I have a video all about that you should check out. I hope you have a great rest of your day. I'll see you next time. Bye.